Flora, Illinois is where this next question comes from, and it says, I'm reading Romans chapter 1. I lose Paul in verse 18 and 19. Who is he referring to when he says, who hold the truth in unrighteousness? He talks of they and them halfway through chapter 2. We're not to judge them, and they'll be rewarded according to their deeds. Could you help me with this?
May I say to you that the epistle to the Romans is probably the greatest document that's ever been written. I could give you a very brief answer to your question, but apparently you have two problems, and one problem is actually that of just plain simple grammar. When you find, for instance, a pronoun that you say you're having trouble with, follow back in the verse or the chapter or even the book, and you'll find that them refers to something that's already been mentioned. When them is referred to, it's always referring back to someone. And if you would then take time to go back, you would discover who these are. That is one of the problems. And then the second one is you need to get an overview of Romans. And I do not believe, judging from your question, though we had Romans some time ago, that you heard the study on Romans. Had you, I believe you'd have the answer to your questions. Now, the reason that you got lost in verses 18 and 19 was because beginning with Romans 1:1, you didn't follow the study through. And I made a comment on Romans 1:18 that I'd like to read to you. It's in my book on Romans, the 5 volumes, and I feel that if you had this, it would help you in understanding what Paul is talking about in Romans 1:18. In 1:18 he says, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of man, who hold the truth in unrighteousness. Now will you listen to this? The wrath of God is revealed. Actually, if you want to know what salvation really is, you have to know how bad sin is. Stifler says, sin is the measure of salvation. And believe me, that's true. The wrath of God is God's feeling, not his punishment of sin. It is his holy anger. Wrath is the antithesis of righteousness, and it is used here as a correlative. Is being revealed is God's answer to those who assert that the Old Testament presents a God of wrath, while the New Testament presents a God of love. There is a continuous revelation of the wrath of God in both the Old Testament and New Testament. It is revealed in our contemporary society. This is God's constant and insistent displeasure with evil. He changes not. God is merciful, not because he is lenient with the sinner, but because Christ died, and that's the reason. The gospel has not changed God's attitude towards sin. The gospel has made it possible for God to accept the sinner. The sinner must have either the righteousness or the wrath of God. Both are revealed from heaven, and you can see it on every hand. If you want to know how bad sin is, look at the cases of venereal diseases today. Look at AIDS. A great many are trying to say, a very prominent doctor in Boston has said on TV several times, AIDS is not a judgment of God. Well, I don't know how he knew that, but it is a judgment of God. You don't get by with sin, my friend. I won't give personal illustrations, but I've been a pastor long enough to see again and again the judgment of God upon sin. It is revealed from heaven. Also, there will be a final judgment against all ungodliness. Ungodliness is that which is against God. It is that which denies the character of God. Oh, the irreligiousness of today. There are multitudes of people who disregard the very existence of God. That's a state of the soul. That's sin. Unrighteousness is against man. Ungodliness is against God. But unrighteousness is against man. What does that mean? Well, it's the denial of the rule of God. It's the action of the soul. That man who gets drunk, goes out on the freeway, breaks the traffic laws, and kills someone, that man is unrighteous. He is sinning against man. Another example is the man who is dishonest in his business dealings. That is, he'll steal money. I've actually seen so-called Christians that will take money dishonestly. We've had an example of it through the Bible, by the way. God hates man's unrighteousness. He'll judge it. And he says, who holds the truth in unrighteousness, that's literally to hold down. That is, suppress the truth in unrighteousness. You know, the very unrighteousness of man will hold down the truth because of the fact, as I've said, he may be a professing Christian. He suppresses the gospel. People won't believe the gospel because he's supposed to represent it. Now, if you'll get that kind of a background for that, then you'll understand chapter 2 that you seem to have trouble with. You ask, we're not to judge them in chapter 2:1. Well, you and I are not to sit in judgment today as if we're some super-duper person, and these other people are sinners. We're all sinners. And it's not our business to sit in judgment upon these. God is going to judge them, and they'll be judged according to their deeds. That's what he says here in the 6th verse. And you're wondering about it. Well, it just simply means God is going to judge them. May I say to you, I think that if you would get a book on Romans, and of course I suggest my own, but there are other fine books that are written on Romans, and I must confess, better than mine. And if you would read that, it would deliver you from picky verses like this, of taking out this and saying, well, I just don't understand who he's talking about. Well, you need to read all of the content and, candidly, get somebody to help you. You'll find that very helpful. I thank God for the teachers that I've had in the past that have helped me. I've taken a long time for that question because that just happens to be one of the reasons that today people do not understand the Scriptures. It's simply because they don't read and study them. When I say people, I'm talking about Christian people. I have said this now for years, and I say it again right now, and that is the greatest sin in the church today is ignorance of the Word of God. That's the great sin of the church. And this is, to me, a glaring example of it. And since I don't know you and you don't know me, and we're not revealing names, I talk to you this way and rebuke you, and you, I hope, understand. I do it gently, but I do it with the hope that you will turn to a study of the Word of God. That is something that would be very helpful for you.